we're entering into Parshas Vayakhel, and just in terms of the structure of the Parshios in general, so we have Truma and Tetzaveh are essentially the instruction to build the Mishkan, and then Tetzaveh to make the clothing of the Kohen. And then you have Kisisa in the middle, where you have a bunch of different mitzvos and the story of the Egel. And then you have Vayakhel Perkudei. Kisisa has the Parsha Shkalim in it, the mitzvah to give Machatzit HaShekel, and it has the mitzvah to make the Kior also. And then Vayakhel Perkudei to a certain extent replicates Truma Tetzaveh, except it's not the command to build the Mishkan and to make the clothing of the Kohen, but it's actually to the implementation. The Jewish people did everything that they were instructed. And it's definitely worth discussing why it takes 4 Parshios to over and over and over to tell us everything that happened for the Mishkan. But that's not our topic. But we're going to speak specifically about the Kior, which appears in this week's Parsha and appeared in last week's Parsha also. And I'm going to connect it with the mitzvah of Machatzit HaShekel, which is going to be relevant for next week when we have Parsha Shkalim. And it definitely applies to this time of year for sure. And then at the end, we'll make our first reference to Purim. And we'll tie in a little bit of Purim Torah. A little premature, but we're in Adar Aleph, so that's okay. In our Parsha, in source number 1, we have the mitzvah to make the Kior. Or actually the implementation of the Kior being made. Vayas Esa Kior Nechoshes Ve'es Kanon Nechoshes. He made the Kior of copper and its pedestal of copper. B'marus hatzovos asher tzavu Pesach Ohel Moed, with the mirrors of the women who congregated at the entrance of the tent of meetings. The creation of the Kior. The Kior was this copper basin which held water, and as we'll see, we'll step back to the Psukim and Parshas Kitisa from last week. We'll see that this was what the Kohanim used to wash their hands. If you look back at the second section in source number 1, these are the Psukim from last week's Parsha. V'yasisa Kior Nechoshes, and you should make a Kior of copper, v'chanon nechoshes l'rachza, and it should also have the pedestal to be made of copper for washing. V'nasato so bein ohel moed u'bein hamizbeach, you should place it between the tent of meeting and the mizbeach. V'nasata sham amayim, you should place water in the kior. Then pasuk yutes v'rachatzu Aharon u'vanav mimenu, Aaron and his son shall wash their hands from it, esidehem v'esraglehem, their hands and their feet. So twice over, 2 weeks in a row, we see these the instruction and the building of the Kior. So I want to talk about a number of different components of the Kior specifically, and the placement of the Kior in the Torah, which is obviously hard to do when you don't have the entire story in front of you, but I think it's still doable. So the first question is, what are Maros Hatzovos? What are these mirrors of the women? We're going to address that issue. And the second question I want to ask you, which you can't see from the sheets, but the Kior is always the last thing we're told about. The Kior is after the menorah and after the Mizbeach and after the Shulchan and after the Aron. Then you have the Kior. And the truth is, the first time you have Parshas Truma Tetzaveh with everything, all the Kalim, all the Kohen's clothing, and you don't get to the Kior until the third Parsha, until Kisisa. And then when we do it again in Vayakhel, you get the menorah, the Aron, the Shulchan, everything, and then the Kior at the end. So why is the Kior always last? That's going to be one of our questions. So, okay, so no cheating on the sources. So just to deal with that issue, let's skip to source number 5. If you turn to the back side of the sheet, we'll start with source number 5, and we'll start with the halachic component of the shir. This is a comment of the Ramah actually in Shulchan Aruch. So he's talking about the following issue. He's talking about Sefer Torah. And that when we write a Sefer Torah, it's not sufficient, as we all know, to have the Torah naked, in a sense, to have the Torah without any covering, but it has a gartel, it has a belt that goes around it, and it has some kind of cover on the top also. So the Shulchan Aruch is talking about the halachos, the details of a cover you put on a Sefer Torah. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, Ein la'asos mapos l'Sefer Torah, midvarim yishenim shnasu b'hem davar acher l'Torah chedir. A person should not make a cover for a Torah from old materials that were used for other things or for personal things. It shouldn't be recycled material. This is a principle that existed in the things that were built for the Mishkan and for the Mizbeh, and the Beit HaMikdash, and it applies also to a certain extent in shuls. There's a machlokes, there's a debate in the poskim to what extent it applies. Does it apply to a parochet, the cover on the aron? Does it apply to the cloths that we put on top of the bima? How far do you take this rule? But it definitely extends to the cover on the Sefer Torah, which doesn't have the same level of Kiddusha, of holiness, as the Torah itself, but enough, we can understand why it has enough of a significance where we don't take recycled or previously used materials and reuse them for the cover on the Sefer Torah. Okay, that's the din. So, says the Magen Avraham, something very interesting. The Magen Avraham is one of the commentaries you'll find in certain sections of Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is broken up into 4 volumes, and in the volume of Orach Chaim, which deals with most of the things that we encounter on a regular day, tefillin, talis, davening, brachos, all those issues, you have the commentary of the Magen Avraham. So that's paragraph number 2 in source 5. He quotes Tosos in Megillah, and Tosos writes, Kelim shenasu mitchilaso lehedyot, something that was originally made for private use for an individual, ein osin osan legavoa. You can't then go and make them for holy things, for the Beis HaMikdash, for a shul. Avanim v'koros shechatzvu mitchila lehedyot, a person carves out stones, he chops down trees so that he can build a house. Ein bonen osan b'har habayit, so you don't go and build those on the temple now, because those are personal property. That's not respect for the temple. Because of Harambam, the Rambam writes, Mashma afilu heim chadashim, even if they've never been used. We're not talking about that they're used, but once they were, the trees were chopped down for the purposes of the extension on my house, so that's it. You can't use them for the Beis HaMikdash. Umihu. He says, however, ha'olam noagin la'asos afilu miyashenim. He says the custom in most places is they use old materials to make covers for the Sefer Torah. Ukimoshe kasav ma'aril. So what do you do about the Rambam? The Rambam says you can't use old materials for the Beis HaMikdash, for the Mishkan, things like that. So he says, V'nir ali d'sfir lahu de Beis HaMikdash shiny. He says maybe the Beis HaMikdash is on a higher standard than the average shul, than the tefillin bag you make for your son at his bar mitzvah. That's not the same thing as the walls of the temple itself. Okay, we can make such a distinction. That's not so surprising. V'od nir ali. But then the Magen Avraham says, I'll tell you a second reason. Dafka kimo shehin asher lishtamish b'hem. It's only true that it's prohibited to reuse old materials for things that we need in the shul if they are in their original state. Aval imshina tu rasan, but if you adapt, if you change their shape, their image, the asa mehen kli acher, and you make something different from it, shari, then it's permissible. Dehare, what's his proof? Kior hakior naaseh mimaros hatzovos, because the kior that we're talking about tonight was made from women's personal mirrors. So these were things that were of private use, and therefore they were on a lower status, so to speak, and you might have thought that they were unacceptable to be used when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash. So what must the answer be, says the Magen Avraham? Must be that we have this concept in other areas of halacha. We could talk about different examples where this occurs. We have a concept called shinoi. If a person takes something and changes it, we don't see it as the same item as it was before. A great example of that is when it comes to theft. A person steals someone else's object, they have a responsibility to return it. Like Hashavas Aveda, there's Hashavas Hagzela. There's a mitzvah to return a stolen object. But if the stolen object is changed so much that it doesn't resemble the thing that you stole, you only have to pay back the money. You don't have to return the item itself. That's one example. So he says that the notion of shinoi, that things can change, should apply here, should apply to the Beis HaMikdash, should apply to the Beis HaKnesses, just as it applies in other areas, like it applies in the laws of Gzela, for example. So the mirrors, how were they acceptable? After all, if the women were using them for personal use, it's not appropriate that they would be used again a second time. Recycled materials in the Mishkan must be that because the way the kior was forged, the shinoi was significant enough that it was okay for Moshe to accept them. Question?
So he's learning a general principle from this particular incident.
Absolutely.
But don't we understand that the women used the mirrors so that the men would...
The source number 2. We're going to get there.
But I'm just, if we hold that, then can you extrapolate a general case from a specific where it's gone from a holy use to...
100%. That's perfectly valid. And you're not the first one to ask that question. A lot of the Achronim ask that question.
That's good company.
You're definitely... That question is in very good company. Okay, that's one question. First of all, in terms of the halachic principles that we're working with, methodologically speaking, can you assume you know what Moshe Rabbeinu was thinking to make that kind of assumption is not so easy. But that's the leap that he makes. There is a better question. There is a very obvious question here, which is, where did the rest of the gold come from for the Beis HaMikdash?
From Egypt.
It was gold bullion? No. Jewelry.
Wait, wasn't the jewelry used for the egel?
True.
It was recycled too.
But I assume that the rest of the gold that they used was recycled also. Maybe not all of it. No. So the gold for the Avodah Zarah, I assume, was for sure not used for the Mishkan. That's prohibited. Oh, so that's interesting too.
Yeah.
And the gold that they took from the MiTzion. That's a good question. Okay. True. So we're talking about jewelry. If you assume that the egel took place after the building of the Mishkan,
right,
then you even more so that where would you think the people would turn instinctively? It wouldn't be the first time. So that's another strong question. But the first question of the day is, hey, we all know this famous Rashi, the Midrash Tanchuma, in source number 2. And we'll see that this statement of the Magen Avraham is very problematic. B'maros Hatzovo, says Rashi, Benos Yisrael hayu biyadon maros. The women of Israel had in their hands copper mirrors, sharos bahen kishehin miskashtos, that they would use when they would beautify themselves. Ve'af osan lo ikvu milahavi linidavas hamishkan. And even those mirrors, which were very useful to them, they did not withhold from donating to the Mishkan. V'haya mos Moshe bahen. What was Moshe Rabbeinu's reaction to receiving these mirrors? So he was disgusted by it. Why? He says this wasn't an appropriate thing. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu kabel. But God's response was, no, you should take them. Ki elu chavivin alai min hakol. Because these are dearest to me of them all. The exact opposite of Moshe's reaction. Shal yedein hamidu hanashim tzivos rabos b'mitzrayim. Because that is how the women would establish legions in Egypt. When their husbands were exhausted by the labor, they would bring them food and drink, and they would feed them, and they would take their mirrors. And she would show herself and her husband in the mirror, and she would seduce him with words. More beautiful than you are. And they would, by that, they would entice their husbands, and they would be together, and then they would become pregnant and they would give birth. Shenemar, this is what King Solomon referred to in Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs. Tachas haTzapuach orarticha, under the apple tree I aroused you. V'zeu shenemar b'maros hatzovos, and this is what it means by the mirrors of those women. V'naaseh hakior mehem, and the kior was made from those mirrors. Shehu lasum shalom bein ish leishto, because it makes peace between man and his wife. So this is the famous statement of Rashi, really the famous statement of the Midrash, that this is the origin of the mirrors. So now we have a big problem with this statement of the Magen Avraham. This year is turning into halacha shir right now. The Magen Avraham says, you learn from here that something that was used for hedyot can't be accepted, but if you make a shinoi and it's no longer recognizable where it comes from, we'll take it.
Okay.
But you get the opposite impression from this Midrash, right? Because the Midrash is saying that Moshe didn't want to take them because they were maybe an extreme davar hedyot. They were a davar mos, right? Something disgusting. And Hashem told him, no, it's the opposite. This was what saved the Jewish people. This was more than a mitzvah.
Yeah, only Moshe can think like that.
So if it's true that this was really something special, so then obviously Moshe should take them. God told him to take them. But any other davar hedyot, you can't really learn from. It's very interesting that the Magen Avraham wasn't working with this Midrash. Now, regarding the question of what about the other materials, so what one suggestion offered is that when it comes to other shinuyim, when it comes to other changes in the shape or the form of an object, we talk about a significant change. You take gold earrings and necklaces and bracelets and you melt them down and you shape them into the cups of a menorah, into the poles of an aron. They don't resemble their original form at all. No one can come to the Beit HaMikdash and point at it and say, that pole was my earring. No one can do that. However, the structure of the kior was such that they just took these mirrors and kind of stuck them all together. So not necessarily that each person would know what theirs was, but the shinoi was less significant. So it's true in general we have a principle of shinoi that applies to Geneva, applies to all these things that we're familiar with. We know if it's not the same, it's not the same anymore. But here where the shinoi was less significant, so maybe you wouldn't have known it, and that's why the Magen Avraham came along to give this suggestion.
What's
Shina means, a change. So
they didn't melt down these copper mirrors?
So that's what they seem to be saying, that they weren't melted down to their raw form and then reformed, but they were kind of molded together. I'm not sure what the right term would be for it.
So they used the copper and the mirrors?
The mirrors were the copper, just to clarify. Right, exactly. It was like a mosaic of
silver. If you shine silver, you can be a mirror. So
right. I wonder exactly. They have that.
And they looked even
there's a kind of silver, right?
Would look a lot better in the
What's it called? There's a certain kind of silver.
Huh?
Looks like it's hammered out.
Of course,
You know what I mean? I wonder if it looked like that. I'm not sure. But they're saying this. The shinoi the change was so insignificant that you might have thought that it was still unacceptable because it was a davar hedyo.
So that's why he had to bring this reason.
So he had to bring a reason and say that you see from Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, we still haven't answered the question of the Midrash. I'm not sure how the Magen Avraham would address that issue. The Midrash does seem to imply that it was a mitzvah, but so it would be a little bit different.
The number bothers me. I mean, how many mirrors did they need to make this thing? There was how many women? And they all had these mirrors. They only needed probably 20 or 30 to make them.
I don't know the dimensions of the kior. I don't know. Probably need more than 20. I would guess more than 20, but I don't think they would need 300,000.
100,000.
True. 100%. That's definitely true. Right. Well, I don't think every piece of gold that Jewish people had went to the Mishnah. I don't know. First come, first served. I don't know. It's a good point. So, I know that's interesting. By the way, when I looked at this Magen Avraham, so I immediately went to the Mishnah Berurah, which is the next step in terms of seeing how this was analyzed going forward. And in the footnotes on the Mishnah Berurah that I have in the Kollel, so they quote a tshuva from Chassam Sofer, who we've quoted here before. We've got a couple different stories with Chassam Sofer. He was the son-in-law of Rav Kiva Eger. We mentioned him before. So he addresses this issue, and specifically, apparently, they were either making a paroches or they were making covers for the Sefer Torah from people's old kittles from Yom Kippur. And they asked if that was acceptable, and he said absolutely, because it was a davar mitzvah. It's not making it out of skirts or pants. It was out of a kittel, which was used to daven on the holiest days of the year, so he saw no problem with it. So that furthers our question on the Magen Avraham, really, that if this was a davar mitzvah, from one mitzvah to another, maybe it's not so bad. Now, you're going to deal with another technical issue, which is certain mitzvahs are maybe holier than others. Malin b'kodesh v'lo moridin, so we would go up in terms of holiness, but not down in terms of holiness. But again, you have to kind of figure that out case by case. Kittel versus cover for a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah cover is not a mitzvah itself. It's what we call tashmishe mitzvah. Something that's used to protect the mitzvah, like a tefillin bag, for example. So there are rules to tashmishe mitzvah. You can't just throw those things away. Even though it's just a bag that holds the tefillin, you can't just throw in the trash. So that's one example, but that a halachic issue that results from this discussion about the kior. Okay. In Parshas Kisisa, last week's Parsha, the topic of the kior is juxtaposed to the mitzvah of machatzit hashekel. Parshas Kisisa starts out, Kisisa, Rosh Bnei Yisrael, when you count the heads of Jewish people, everyone should give a machatzit hashekel, and then the Sisa Kior. Why are these two things put one next to the other? So, in order to answer that question, I'm going to go back and address the mitzvah of machatzit hashekel just a little bit, and then we'll put the two together and develop, and I think see a little bit more about the kior at the same time. if you look at the Kli Yakar, he says something fascinating in source number 3. And he says that the Jewish people, through the Machatzit HaShekel, are being counted. And he says throughout Tanakh, you see that the Jewish people are counted after they've made mistakes. And he gives you a few examples. Ubederach zeh nimshulu Yisrael kochavim. The Jewish people are compared to stars, as it states, Hamotzi b'mispar tziva'am, the one who brings out with the numbers of his legions. Ki mispar ahu vaday hu ba'avor ma'alasam. That this great number that the Jewish people are compared to, stars, is because of their greatness. Ki b'li safek shakadosh baruch hu yodea misparam. God knows how many Jewish people there are, and he's trying to say they're as great as the stars. That's his way of showing how great the Jewish people are. They're as numerous as the grains of sand, as the number of stars in the sky. Kach mispar b'nei Yisrael achar ma'aseh ha'egel. He says, so too was the dearness of the number of the Jewish people after the sin of the golden calf. Lema shenemar achar chet shel Reuben. Look what happens after Reuben sins. What does it say? Vayu b'nei Yaakov shnei masar. It counts that there were 12 tribes. All 12 were still there. Nobody gets dropped. Exactly. Kaf hodia lanu kan. Here in Parshas Kisisa, when the Jewish people are counted after the sin of the golden calf, it's coming to tell you shelo nimasu ba'avor ma'aseh ha'egel, that they were not tainted in the eyes of God because of their sin, because of the golden calf. Ela kulam b'malos hamispar hamoreh. But each of them still remained in the greatness of their numbers. Shekol Ishmei Yisrael mushkach b'hashgacha pratis, that the hashgacha pratit, the way that God has divine involvement with each person, that didn't change for a second. The Jewish people were still there. Every single person gives his machatzit hashekel. So says the Kli Yakar, why half a shekel? Lots of reasons for why half a shekel. But he says something awesome. V'tam l'machatzit hashekel, the explanations for the half shekel, nimsu b'midrashim kama drachim shonos. There are lots of different explanations for why the machatzit hashekel was given. V'omer ani, and I suggest, lahosif aleim od shlosha ta'amim. I'll give you 3 more reasons. Only the first one is here. Ha'echad hu, the first reason is, l'fisha b'maiseh ha'egel, garmu shviras haluchos l'shnayim. Moshe comes down and he stumbles upon the people worshipping the golden calf, and he smashes the luchos against the ground and he breaks them into pieces. So too, al kein yitnu beka, you should give a broken piece. Hainu shekel baku al ishnayim. A half shekel, a broken shekel, as a kapara for the Maaseh ha'egel. Why are the Jewish people being counted? They're being counted to tell you that they haven't lost their stature in the eyes of God. God is still caring about them. And why is it a half a shekel? To remind them that their actions caused the breaking of the luchos. There are more that support this, by the way. Kisisa, how much is a shekel worth? The Torah says a shekel is esrim gera, right? 20 gera. Just like you have 4 quarters in $1, so you have 20 gera in a shekel. Half a shekel is 10 gera. 10 gera, 10 commandments. There are more to that effect. But why am I bringing this in here? Because what is the purpose of the machatzit hashekel? It's a kapara. It's a atonement for the sin of the golden calf and the effect of it, which caused the luchos to be broken in half. Okay. So the question we have to ask: every antidote, every act of tshuva, of repentance, has to be appropriate for the crime. So why is machatzit hashekel? I get the symbolism, but it has to be more than that. Why is giving a machatzit hashekel more than just paying a toll when you cross the road? Why is that an atonement for the sin of the golden calf?
Were they all equally guilty?
Not everyone. True.
But they're all equally required to give exactly the same amount.
Well, again, we're also trying to show that the people's stature hadn't been lost. I mean, there's more than one goal to machatzit hashekel.
Same with respect to the kapara.
True. So, source number 4, I will confess to you, I'm not someone who reads Noam Elimelech very often. Source number 4 is a Hasidic Sefer, but if you look in the blue art scroll Chumash, the stone Chumash that everyone uses on Shabbos, so every once in a while you see something there that's really golden. So he quotes from the Noam Elimelech, and I looked it up inside, so you have the actual text from the Noam Elimelech there. So he says the following: Zeh yitnu, this you shall give. Now before we go on to this, let me just explain something. The word zeh, Zayin Hey, means this. And whenever God says zeh, when God says this, the Midrashim always assume, whether it's literal or figurative, that God was pointing. And God was saying this, right? Showing something. 3 examples. Example number 1, not in the text here, is the first time Hashem shows Moshe the moon for Kiddush HaChodesh. HaChodesh hazeh lachem, this month is for you. What does the Gemara say? Kazeh rei v'kadesh. When you see the moon looks like this, that's when you know it's time for Kiddush HaChodesh. Example number 2, v'zeh ma'aseh ha-menorah. This is what the menorah should look like. Moshe said, how am I supposed to take gold and make one uniform piece of gold into a single menorah? Hashem says, make it like this. Vision number 3, Zeh Yitinu. Moshe says to God, what are the Jewish people supposed to give when you want to count them? He says, give a half a shekel. Zeh Yitinu, give a half a shekel like this. Isa b'Gemara. So in the Gemara it states, Min matbeya shel eish heralo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. God showed Moshe a coin of fire, mitachas kisei hakavod, beneath his holy throne. Ve'amar lo kazeh yitnu. That's what the Gemara says. Now, immediately you have a bunch of questions about this statement. What does it mean it's beneath the holy throne of God? And why is it fiery? Why is it a matbeya shel eish? What's the symbolism there? So he says something amazing. Ki atzura shel hamatbeya hi mechave or nishmas adam. The shape, the form of a coin can extinguish the soul of man. Kasher yavin midaito, as we can all understand from our own knowledge. Im nosein daito al hamatbeya. If a person sets his focus on money, on the shape of his coin, nichbe or haseichel, the light of his seichel will be extinguished, of his intellect. Mimenu lizeh. So lizeh amar Hashem hatov kazeh yitinu. Give like this. Tahainu sheyisnahagu im kaspehem kazeh. Interact with your finances like this. Shehu eish mitachas kisei hakavod, like a flame beneath the holy throne of God. De eish soref ve'eish mecham. Because the fire can burn, and the fire can also keep warm. Meaning it can be the most productive and the most constructive, the exact same material. Tahainu chas v'chalila misnahig b'kasbo shelo kahogin. If a person, God forbid, interacts with his money improperly, az sarfasa, it will burn him. The misnahig kishura b'tzaka b'leiv shalim, he gives charity with a sincere heart, ugmilas chasadim, and he does acts of kindness. Azeh hamitzvah hazos magas akise hakavod, the fire of his actions can reach all the way to the throne of God Himself. Umachmaso, and through this magia la'oneg rav bazeh ubiva amin. He says God appreciates a certain amount. God gets a benefit from the quality of those actions. The same actions that can be so destructive can be so constructive as well. It's all what you make of it.
Yes.
So he says, think about, I would add, think about the Kli Yakar, put these two things together. The fiery coin that we're talking about here is the atonement for the Chet HaEgel. What did they do? Aaron says, give me your gold. They said, no problem. You want me to donate to the cause? No problem. Somebody told me once, I think I mentioned this in the class once before, maybe a few months ago, I'm not sure, that I saw a rabbi who's actually originally from here, from Toronto, told me that his father used to say that when people want something of their own, they're very quick to donate, like the Maisa Egel, and when they come to you for the Mishkan, it's not always as easy. But he said, look at the contrast that God is asking for between the Machatzis HaShekel and the Egel. Take your money and make something selfish, make something idolatrous, make something that's disgusting. That's what the people did with their money. They had so much gold. They took tons of it from Yamsuf. They took tons of it from Mitzrayim. And they did the worst possible thing that they could. They created a tremendous destruction, which was symbolized by the destruction of the Luchos themselves. So what is the perfect atonement for that? Not one machatzit hashekel, not a one-time donation of 50 cents. But a different mentality about the way they appreciated and the way that they used the money that they were given by God. And that machatzit hashekel is the atonement for the Maisa Egel.
It was you last week that you said about Rabbi Yehuda Levi that says that they didn't sin, right?
True.
So
Right.
that's what it is. They didn't sin.
He is a minority.
Right. Well, they definitely sinned. Again, the question last week was to what
Yeah,
extent
they
the
sin,
sin was.
They sin, but not so.
Right.
Of the fact, look, I'm
Right.
clear car
Right.
shows you the continuation of Rabbi Yehuda Levi, because you see, Hashem even loved him more, and now he even showed himself to Moshe after that, which he didn't did before.
So it's interesting.
Uh-huh.
Moshe Rabbeinu's experience. It's interesting because on the one hand, Moshe is having the greatest religious experience of his life on Har Sinai, and the Jewish people are experiencing their lowest moment off the mountain. So the contrast between them when Moshe comes down, that Moshe has to move his tent away, Moshe has to wear a veil over his face. How much of that is Moshe's experience and how much of it is the Jewish people moving themselves from him? You have to kind of balance those two factors because they're two different variables happening at the same time.
It's one
So, or
figure,
maybe
it's
two people moving in opposite directions, or two groups of people moving in opposite directions.
very
also
important.
Moses.
It's very important. I mean, it's like we can't excuse ourselves too much. We can't.
Right.
We know that we're still suffering. That Hashem told us that all the suffering.
Right, every
in this world,
generation, right.
we're still suffering from Chet HaEgel. It was a big sin. Whether it was exactly Avodah Zarah or not, that we can debate. But it was a huge sin, and we're
Right.
still suffering the pebbles from that.
So I was thinking about this because of last week. We're talking about the Egel and this Kli Yakar and all these different things that came up in last week's Parsha. And then I turned to the Kior and the Rashi about the mirrors. And I thought about the fact that we have the Kior right next to Machatzit HaShekel last week. And I started putting them all together. And I said to myself, in some ways, excuse the pun, but Machatzit HaShekel and the Kior are two sides of the same coin. How so? Moshe's reaction to the donation of mirrors for the Kior was this is physical, this is about body image, this is about relationships between husbands and wives, it has no place here. This is a spiritual place, I don't want anything physical. And Hashem tells him the exact opposite. It's not that money is terrible and beauty is terrible. The opposite is true. That's what the Mishkan was. It was a Hiddur Mitzvah. It was the glorification of God in a physical manifestation. And the prime example of the Jewish people taking that initiative and understanding that their role was to embrace their physical reality, the perfect example of that is the way that these women acted in Mitzrayim, the way that they put their looks and their mirrors to use for the sake of their people, to keep the morale of the slaves up so that they would make it to receive the Torah. It's exactly the message the Machatzis HaShekel is trying to send to the Jewish people after the mistake of the Egel. That when they messed up, their responsibility was to turn around and start having a Machatzis HaShekel type of interaction with their money, with their physical world, to make sure that they weren't being burned by their financial success, but they were using it to create warmth in this world. And the two of them really fit perfectly side by side, that they're great examples of the way that physicality can be used in Avodas Hashem. They really fit beautifully.
Do you think also the use of the kior, the fact that it was being used to wash hands and feet?
Okay, amazing.
The use.
My chavrusa David Teller was telling me the other day the term netilas yadayim.
Yeah.
What does netila mean? To lift up your hands. It's supposed to lift up your hands after you wash them, and it obviously has a spiritual implication also in terms of it takes us from a status of impurity to purity and it raises us up. That is exactly what they were doing with the kior. One step further, the kior obviously even asata shama mayim. The kior is the one vessel in the Mishkan, in the Beit Hamikdash, that holds water. Water symbolizes this just the same.
Purity.
Water is purity. Water is mikvah. Water is netilas yadayim. But water is also physical. Water is the source of life for all the plants and everything that we eat. Water is one of the most essential things that a human being needs to survive physically. And this is I have the Shulchan also. We talked about the symbolism of the Shulchan a few weeks ago. Shulchan symbolized wealth. But the mayim also is obviously a symbol of this physical reality. And to continue this further, I would just point out, I couldn't find the text, but my Rosh Yeshiva, I had a conversation with my Rosh Yeshiva a few years ago when I was in Israel, and he quoted to me something that he heard from Rav Kook. And Rav Kook said something very beautiful, that the celebration of Sukkot, that celebration is a physical celebration. Things that have grown from the ground, the lulav and the esrog and the hadassim and the aravos, products of the physical world. And what is the major avoda what is the major worship in the Beit HaMikdash on Sukkot? Nisa Chamayim. When they would take the water libations and pour it off the Mizbeach, water was central in the worship at that time. Simchas Beis HaShoeva, those parties on Sukkot, were started because the celebration of water, because it was the beginning of Mashiv Haruach Mored HaGeshem, davening for rain at the beginning of the year. It's all the same thing. And Rav Kook apparently writes, and I didn't see this inside, that at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, that is the time of year when the women stood in the balconies above the men. And Rav Kook wanted to suggest that symbolically the women who had an easier time embracing the physical world, embracing the mayim of the kior, the mayim that brings shalom, that brings peace between husband and wife. So that is the time when they're elevated in the temple itself above the men that they have relationships with. It's all one big theme. Really beautiful idea about the kior and the water itself that the kior contained, the structure of the kior, the materials the kior was made from, and the history of those materials where they were before. It's all one big picture. And I would add that there is one more great step connected to Purim that I was very excited about. On Purim we have the minhag to give 3 machatzit hashekel. Stick with the machatzit hashekel theme here. The machatzit hashekel, we give 3 because it says teruma, donation, 3 times in the parsha. Machatzit hashekel needs to be given before the month of Nisan, before Pesach comes. But the rabbis instituted in the times of the Gemara that the machatzit hashekel should be given on the beginning of Nisan, but they should all be collected by the beginning of Adar, the month before, the month that we're in right now. Why Adar? So the Gemara asks that question. Gemara says, Be'echad ba'adar mashmi'in al ashkalim. On the first day of Adar, we call out that people should hand in their machatzit hashekel to the temple. Why? So it says in the Megillah, Haman goes to Achashverosh and he says, Imal hamelech tov, if it's good in the eyes of the king, yikasev la'abdan. You should write, you should decree, you should declare that the Jewish people should be destroyed. Va'aseres alafim kikar kesef. And then he says, and take this amount of money, basically as a bribe, right? 10,000 talents of silver as a bribe, to pay for the laborers, to pay for the soldiers who are going to be involved in this action. So what does that have to do with anything? Amar Ish Lakish, Galoi v'yadua lifnei Misha Amar v'haya ha'olam. It was revealed, it was known before the person, before God who created the world, She'asid Haman lishkol shkalam Yisrael, that one day in the future Haman would come along and he would count out his shkalim against the Jewish people, offer the king as much money as it would take to have the Jewish people destroyed from his country. Lefikach, therefore, hiktim shkaleihem lishkalav. God made it so that the Jewish people should give their shkalim before the time of year where Haman had the chance to give his. And the mitzvah of machatzit hashekel that we reenact before Purim, that mitzvah is what saved us from the decree of Haman. Okay, so that's great. Haman was giving money, we give machatzit hashekel, wonderful. What's the point? So we outbid him? How do you look at this Gemara? What does it mean that Haman was going to give, so we gave first? What's the significance of this? So I think the answer is very obvious. What is the reason that the Jewish people were in this situation to begin with? What is the first thing the Megillah tells us? Achashverosh throws a party, And it's not just any party. What's he using to serve all his foods on? Kalim mikalim shonim. He's using the kalim of the Beis Hamikdash. And who is there using the kalim, the Devarim Shebekdusha, the holy things of the Beis Hamikdash, for something non-spiritual, for something of a davar hedyot, like we started with? Who's there? The Jewish people. They took what they had given with the Meleches Machsheves, with a pure intention, to the Beis Hamikdash, and they're partying with Achashverosh in exile. That's where this whole thing gets started. So if what we're saying about the Machzit HaShekel is true, it fits perfectly. What is the antidote? This is the Chet HaEgel all over again. This is taking the money that they had, the money that they had invested in the Beis Hamikdash, and not just using it for other things, but to take the Kalim back, so to speak, from the Beis Hamikdash and use it for the exact opposite of what it was intended to be used for. So what do we need? What's the solution? And the answer is Machatzit HaShekel. The answer to this is that we need to prioritize where our investments are going. This half shekel that we give before Purim, it's not just about the half coin. It's not just about outbidding Haman. It's about assessing what we're doing with the physical world. Are we taking holy things that are physical and holy at the exact same time and using them for a party with Goyim? Or are we taking them to the Machatzit HaShekel? Are we using them, those half coins, for tzedakah, belief shalim, like the Noam Elimelech said? Are we getting burned by that fire? Are we using that fire to create warmth in the world? That tension is exactly what's going on in the Purim story. I would end this point of the shir just by saying that there's a famous Vilna Gaon in Eishes Chayil. Maybe you've heard it, maybe not. It's always good to have a piece of Shabbos Torah because it never gets old. Anywhere you go, it's always Shabbos. So the Vilna Gaon says, Sheker Hachein v'hevel hayofi, right? Sheker Hachein, favor is false. V'hevel hayofi, and beauty is nothingness. Isha yiras Hashem hi tisalo. Right? A woman who fears God, she deserves praise. So the Vilna Gaon said this isn't to say that chen, that favor, is nothing, and that beauty is meaningless. He says when you have a person who is a yiras Hashem, when you have a person who fears God, he tishalal, she should be praised for her beauty and for her chen. Because the two aren't contradictory. And I think that really sums up this exact message of the Kior, the symbolism of the Mayim, the fire with the Machzit HaShekel. It's all one major theme. One other idea in the Parsha, completely unrelated before we go, and that is that if you look at the Kalim, all the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Mishkan, we see that Betzalel, he is the floorman. He is the manager, he is the architect, he is the person who delegates all of the authority. And if you look closely at the Parsha, Ve'asuas ha'aron, Ve'asuas ha'menorah, Ve'asuas ha'shulchan, they made this and they made that and they made this and they made that. And when you get to the Aron, it says Ve'asa Betzalel es ha'aron. The only vessel in the Mishkan that appears to have been specifically built by Betzalel himself is the Aron. And the question is obviously why here is Betzalel getting more of the credit, or why here is Betzalel building and not delegating? What's different about the Aron? Is it just because it's in the Kodesh HaKodashim, he wants it for himself? Why is Betzalel doing this? So the Meshech Chochmah, in his commentary on the Parsha, gives two answers which I think are both very, very powerful answers. One fits back to last week's discussion of the Maisa HaEgel. He says that the Aron is a very misleading piece in the temple. The Gemara tells us in Yuma that when the Romans destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, they took the Aron out of the temple, and what did they see? They saw two kruvim. They saw this image of the boy and the girl hugging each other, and they mocked us. And they said, "This is spiritual people. You have one God, no avodah zarah. And what do you have at the heart of your worship? Two kids kissing."
Right.
Well, that's so embarrassing, right? It's a very difficult thing to understand what the kruvim were all about. And if you see this process of building the Mishkan as an atonement for the biggest mistake of avodah zarah, maybe, that the Jewish people did, and the intention when building these vessels in the Mishkan is so critical. So you got to think that the people who build this need to be really special people. They need to be people that didn't make the mistake at the Egel. They need to be people with the purest machshavot, the purest thoughts. So says the Meshech Chochmah, who better to build it than Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur? Bezalel is the grandson of Hur, who we mentioned last week, was killed fighting against the building of the golden calf. That's approach number one. Bezalel built the Aron because you needed a Bezalel. Everything else you could delegate. Menorah is not so confusing.
What was the Aron made from? Wood.
Gold and wood. Combination. Wood on the inside, wood in the middle, gold on the inside and on the outside. Regarding the issue of the broken shekel, you also have that significance by the Aron, that the measurements of the Aron were 2.5 amos by 1.5 amos by 2.5 amos. I think they're right. 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. That's the symbolism of Torah. Torah being there, a person needs to be modest, see themselves as incomplete. But it was also very misleading because of the kruvim that sat on top of it. You needed a Bezalel. The second answer, the Meshech Chochmah, for why Bezalel is credited here, I think is has a very powerful take-home message, and we'll end with this. He says that Bezalel wasn't more involved with the building of the Aron than with any of the other vessels in the temple. But there was one difference. Other vessels in the temple would be lost, would be damaged, would need to be refurbished and rebuilt, and they would be replaced. The Aron was only built once. This was the Aron of Bezalel, because whenever you see the Aron, you know that is the Aron that Bezalel built. You look at the Shulchan, maybe somebody else did it, maybe this is the Shulchan second edition, this is the second Mizbeach, this is the second Menorah. There was only one Aron in Jewish history. And I think that there's a very powerful message there also, in that everything Bezalel did, he did with 100%. He gave his all to building the Beis HaMikdash. But you never really know which of your actions is going to last the longest. How is Bezalel going to know that this was going to be his trademark, that the Aron was going to be his thing? There was really no way. And it's easy for the Torah to say, looking forward, looking back, the Torah has the ability to know that this was the Aron that Bezalel built. This was the only Aron that would ever be. But I think that that's something that's worth thinking about for ourselves. Every action that we do, what is going to be the action that we're known for? You never really know which. You can do so many things and they all look great, but you never know which one is really going to last forever. And that's for us, Bezalel Aron, that Bezalel built this and it lasted for eternity.